I'd like to thank you all for joining us today for this introduction to the most competitive funding instrument for deep tech startup, the EIC Accelerator. So today we have set aside around 60 minutes for a presentation and Q&A to learn about public funding opportunities for deep tech innovators. This webinar is really an opportunity for us to reflect and share the lessons we learned in the previous 7 years of this funding program, based on the 200 plus application that we submitted, which resulted in funding for the deep tech company we have supported. I'd like to remind you that if you need any additional information following this webinar, you should contact us at the email address on the screen. And also, if you need to suggest or want to suggest any further webinar idea around public funding, we'd be happy to organize that for you as well. So let's get started. Why should you listen to us when looking at public funding, in particular for your portfolio companies? Well, one of the issues we've seen over and over again is the survival bias. There are companies that actually are going through that process and getting funded, and also many that don't. Actually, there are many more that don't. And sometimes the conclusions they take are not aligned with reality. So if you are a successful company, maybe in your portfolio you have one of these or several of these, does not necessarily mean that they exactly know how and why they got funded, simply because of the principle of the survival bias. In the Second World War, when they were looking back at the planes that made it back to the headquarters, they could see that these planes were never shot. They were mostly shot in the wings and tail. And of course, the initial conclusion was, well, we should reinforce those parts because they seem to be targeted by the enemy. Of course, the reality was completely the opposite. The ones that were shot in other parts of the plane. So that's exactly what's going on with funding as well. The ones that get funded do not necessarily know why and how. Of course, they are better than the other companies, but it's difficult to make meaningful conclusions. The only thing you can do is use the power of statistics and a large sample to be able to make those deductions. So luckily, we've done this for 7 years now, since the program was introduced in 2014. And based on the 226 projects that we got funded, we can make those conclusions and help you to screen through your portfolios to find out which companies would have the best chance of applying, and if they want to apply, how they should go about requesting the funding, especially now that there is different possibilities. You can go for grant only, you can go for grant and later equity, you can also go for blended finance from the start with grant and equity funding from the Commission. We'll come back to that in the rest of the presentation. So coming back to what we've done, so far we've gotten around 350 million euros of funding in the EIC Accelerator program itself, 135 million actually last year. And that means that at every given cutoff, there are generally 3 to 4 per year, we've gotten between 5 and 9 companies funded by the program, which roughly represents 14% of the total funding available at European level. The average tickets, to give you an idea of the funding you could expect for your portfolio companies, on our side, it's around 5.6 million. So it varies between 5 and 6 million depending on different calls and cutoffs. It can go from the minimum, the grant is 2.5 million euro maximum, for example, up to the maximum, which is 2.5 million euro of grant plus 15 million euro of equity. So a total ticket of 17.5. And we have 3 such cases, which we'll mention later: Hyber in the Netherlands, IQM in Finland, and Electrochem in Germany. So first step for those of you who are not fully familiar with the instrument is to understand what it is meant for, who can apply in your companies, and of course, most importantly, what are the funding terms? Does that make sense for your companies at their stage of development, and how will they be evaluated? So the EIC Accelerator was really created back in 2014 at the beginning of the Horizon 2020 program It was rebranded EIC Accelerator in October 2019 when they introduced the equity instrument in complement to the original grant instrument. But the EIC Accelerator is really the brainchild of Carlos Moedas, which you can see on the right, who was the former EC Commissioner for Research and Innovation. And what's interesting to know about Carlos is that he was at Harvard Business School and followed the courses of the late Clayton Christensen, who was the one who wrote the Innovator Dilemma and all the theories about disruptive innovation or market creating innovation. So you can see that this thinking has infused the work program and the concept behind the SM instrument, which became the EIC Accelerator. That's really important to know and to understand, because what this instrument is meant to fund is market creating innovation, which means technology that may take a lot of money and time to get to market, but once it comes to market, it will generate significant economic returns and, of course, a job growth and recovery in the current conditions. It's really important to understand because there are many disruptive technologies. We can also call them exponential technologies when they have this capacity to rapidly improve over time, but they're not necessarily always market creating. And I'll give you an example of artificial intelligence. AI is clearly an exponential technology. We've seen the progress it's made over the past 10 to 15 years. It's quite amazing to use in many industries. You can use AI for many things. So on a given week, I can receive a request for a company that is using AI for improving CRM systems, for example. And that's a valid use of AI. Does that fit with the market creation? Probably not. Because if you use AI to improve CRM systems, what you're doing is an incremental innovation. You're making a system that already exists more efficient. You're probably not creating a lot of jobs. In fact, you might be decreasing the jobs because you're making salespeople more efficient. You're making sure that the company can run with less salespeople, with a more advanced CRM system. So it's a very valid investment, and I'm sure you may have some of those in your portfolios, but it's not really the core and the scope of the EIC Accelerator. But let's take the same technology, AI, and on the same week, I was contacted actually by a company in Sweden using AI to develop a chatbot in order to tackle mental counseling, mental coaching. Now, that's an interesting approach here because we're talking about a system that is also based on AI, natural language processing, that can power a chatbot. And that chatbot is able to counsel people who do not want to go see a psychiatrist because they're ashamed or because they may not be sure that they really have a problem. So here we're not replacing anyone. We're actually opening up a new market. People who would not want to seek mental counseling can now receive some automated advice, and they will be more tempted to do that because they know there is no human being on the other side. So they're not ashamed of telling their problems. And that system can then help them, if it's possible for the system to coach them autonomously, or if they really pick up that there's a major issue, then convince and recommend them to go see a human being, a psychiatrist. That's a perfect example of exponential technology, AI, being used for market creation, tackling a very big problem, which is mental health. So in your portfolios, I encourage you to look at those companies who combine both the exponential technology angle and the market creating angle. That is generally referred to as deep tech. Deep tech, I'm sure you've seen many definitions, but I think the one that was recently produced in a report from Sifted and Dealroom, I think is quite interesting. They define it as a combination of high-risk R&D and high-risk product market fit. And I think that's good to see it this way, because often people misrepresent deep tech by saying that you should not invest in deep tech. You should only invest in technologies that already have the product market fit. And I don't think so. I think that there are many entrepreneurs who, of course, have high R&D risks, but they have not reached their product market fit. And this is when they should receive an investment. So when you have these two types of risks, this is really where the EIC Accelerator can play a big role, and where the European Commission should be able to support and fund, and come in complement or support of the VC community, the private VC community. There are many industries, of course, which can be related to this. So when we analyze the companies and we qualify them for the EIC Accelerator, we normally look at the complexity of the technology in terms of the time it took to build it and the type of IP protection they have. But we also want to make sure that this is really a breakthrough and not just an incremental refinement of existing innovation, or a company who simply assemble smart technologies together. So an innovative integration of technology, that's not sufficient either. And of course, for all of these marketplace companies, they might have great opportunities, but probably not in the EIC Accelerator, because that's mostly business model innovation, and that's not really the core of what the EIC Accelerator is about. Why is the EIC investing in Deeptech? Well, it's pretty clear that at the very early stage of the exponential curve, the what we call the deceptive part of the curve, it's not easy to find private funding. Maybe some of you Deeptech investors, which I see on the list here, Jane, hi, are capable of investing at this very early stage in Deeptech, but there are not many people like this. And I think it's very important that there are also public funding instruments supporting these early stage investors to make sure that the companies are able to progress the technology up to the point where they can go for large influx of capital at decent valuations. And BioNTech is definitely the poster child of that type of evolution. For 10 years, they essentially did research and not much happened. And at that time, they got actually quite a lot of funding from the European Commission in the form of grants, because there was no EIC Accelerator at the time. And it's very likely that at the time, they would have had a very hard time to get funding. I mean, there were some early investors like MIG, but not many people would knock on their door to invest. So they really went into that massive Series A 10 years later, once they have proven their technology. And of course, we all know now what impact this has had on the world with the development of one of the first RNA, messenger RNA vaccine to fight COVID. So this is really the kind of things that we're looking at now when we're talking about the EIC Accelerator. And here, an important dimension beyond being a disruptive technology which is able to create a market is the societal impact. In the case of BioNTech, it's obvious with the health angle, but there are many other such angles, and you probably have heard about a fairly important initiative by the Commission called the New Green Deal, where the Commission is, of course, trying to position technologies and to support technologies that can have an impact on climate change. So here the idea is to focus on companies who will be able to impact the world in a meaningful ways. And I think here we're not talking about unicorn in the sense of reaching €1 billion or $1 billion valuation, but we're talking about a unicorn in terms of touching the lives of 1 billion people positively. I think this is also one of the aims of the EIC Accelerator. And you can see here that in the historical data that we show, a lot of it has been health. It's been very heavy on health. I think now the Commission is pushing really towards Green Deal. So you will see more and more of SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. You will see a lot more of SDG 13, Climate Action, which is quite low right now. And this will, of course, develop further in the coming program, because one of the key dimensions of Horizon Europe is definitely the Green Deal. And they started already with this in the previous program, Horizon 2020. So in May 2020, there was a special deadline of the EIC Accelerator focusing on the Green Deal, where we saw a bit more than 2,000 applicants, and the Commission was able to allocate €307 million to 64 companies with an average ticket of 4.8 million. So that was pretty good. We got a few companies funded on that round. For example, Electrocare in Germany, who raised the maximum amount of 17.5 million. There are now new Green Deal challenges opening up, and they will be available at the two main deadlines of June 2021 and October 2021. But in order to be able to submit at those deadlines, you first need to go through a pre-selection filter, which I will explain later. So first of all, if you're looking at your portfolio, what kind of companies would you want to encourage to apply? The main eligibility is that you have to, of course, have a legal entity. There are some exceptions. for stage one. You need to be an SME, and an SME is a specific definition based on the headcount, turnover, and balance sheet. So typically less than 250 employees, and then either turnover below 50 million or balance sheet below 43 million. But you also have ownership requirements for an SME. So an SME cannot be owned by a large corporate for more than 25% of its capital, and cannot be owned by more than 50% of its capital by a VC or university or local authority. That's normally not an issue, but we may have seen borderline cases where the VC share is getting above 50%, or there's a large corporate involved. And in that case, they would not be an SME anymore. However, the Commission has expanded the definition to mid-caps, small mid-caps, which means companies below 500 employees. And they will also be able to apply, even if they're not an SME, by those definitions. But in that case, they will only be allowed to apply for equity and not grant. The company, the legal entity, has to be in a associated a member state or an associated country, which currently is Norway, Israel, Switzerland. And there is a special case of the UK, which is an associated country, as you know, and they can apply for a grant under the instrument, but not for equity. And then there are special rules for very early stage teams, probably not relevant for you since you already have a portfolio of developed companies, but there are possibilities for natural persons to apply in the first stage before they set up their entity. This can be useful, by the way, for a company that may be outside of Europe and wants to relocate to Europe. It would be possible to apply even before you have the legal entity in Europe, provided that you demonstrate that you'll have the legal entity in Europe by the time you're applying for the full stage. And of course, that you have commitment to implement the R&D and to have the IPR located in Europe. Otherwise, if you're just a US company with a French subsidiary, a sales subsidiary trying to get EU funding, that's probably not the right way to go. Another important eligibility criteria is the level of technology maturity, also called TRL, technology readiness level. That's a scale that the EC stole from NASA, and they've been using it to qualify all of the companies in terms of technology maturity. So the requirement here is that companies should have reached at least TRL 5, which means technology validated in the relevant environment, before they apply to an EIC Accelerator grant. If they haven't, there are other instruments. So it doesn't mean they cannot do anything. There are other instruments like the EIC Pathfinder, which they can also apply for earlier grants. So that's something that you can recommend to them, and we're happy to advise them on this. But for the EIC Accelerator, which is the focus of this presentation, you need to at least have reached that TRL 5, which essentially means you have an MVP that you've tested with some alpha or clients. And then you can use the grant that you request to develop the technology further between TRL 6 and TRL 8. And then you can also raise equity, and equity can fund anything. It's usually used to fund the TRL 9 activities, the market development activities. But for capital intensive industries like maybe quantum computing, for example, it would be natural that the money would also be used for R&D tasks. How does the funding works? If you apply for blended finance, which is the standard case, you will be able to ask for up to 2.5 million euro of grant, non-dilutive funding. This is given to you. You don't have to reimburse it. You don't have to give any shares. It will be focusing on your TRL 6 to 8 activities, so bringing the product from prototype stage to a ready to launch stage. And the Commission will fund 70% of the cost of a project that will be typically 2 years. The good news is that the company will receive a significant amount already at pre-financing stage. So 55% of that will be given at month 0, so that the company doesn't have to wait until they get the funding. And then for the equity component, which runs in parallel, the amount can be much larger, up to 15 million euros. The money can be applied to any development stage from TRL 6 to TRL 9. But the requirement is that there should be a one-to-one co-funding by external investors. So in other words, if you have a company that is planning to ask 5 million euro to the European Investment Council, then it means that they should be able to raise 5 million from private investors, and the total round would be 10 million. And the way the EC has structured this is quite smart, because what they do is they understand that you won't be able to raise immediately a round to be able to incorporate them into that. There is a timing issue. So they will offer you, or the company, 50% of the funding that they've committed as convertible debt. And that can happen fairly quickly in the first year of the project, right here month 12, typically. And then they will give you the second half on the following year, once you have implemented your next round of financing with the co-investors. So that's actually a good way to make sure that the companies receive cash and has a runway while they are structuring their next round of financing. But it's important to know, because that investment doctrine has changed. There was a previous approach, especially it was written in the text of the work program, that seemed to indicate that the Commission could be funding 100% of the equity round. And that's not the case anymore, which is kind of good news for the VC community, because really the idea is not to crowd out private capital, but to reinforce it. The Commission, by the way, is representing themselves as a patient investor. They're talking about 10 to 15 years timelines. So they're very patient here. They're not looking at early exits, and they also want to be founder friendly in their terms. Now, this instrument is new, so they are still experimenting with it, and obviously there are things that are running as fast as they want. And so here you have to be prepared for a longer process than a typical private investment process in terms of due diligence, legal steps, implementation, and so on. There will be significant budget this year allocated to the instrument. There are two types of calls, which are both available on the same deadlines in June and in October. The open call means that you can submit any application on any topic. There is a budget of 600 million for this deadline. And the challenge-driven calls are more focusing on specific aspects: digital, health, green tech. And here there is a budget of 507 million. So a significant amount, over 1.1 billion, available already in 2021 for that purpose. But there are different steps required, and we'll come back to that. But before you can go to the full stage, you first need to file a short application. And for this, there is no deadline, it's a rolling basis. And it should open up in March, April, from what we see. So this is the full process. It's a bit complicated, bear with me. I'll try to make it simple. There are three main steps that you can see here. On the left, the short application stage. That's the first stage. It's on the rolling basis. And what is asked of the applicant is to provide a 3-minute video, a pitch deck of 10 slides, and a 5-page application form, which is filled online. That short application is then evaluated by external evaluators, experts, which are not employees of the Commission. They're part of a pool of experts selected by the Commission. In fact, you, investor, Deeptech investor, could be an expert if you want, of course, and provided there's no conflict of interest or you're not judging your own proposals. And those people will decide if the proposal should go to the next stage. So it will be a go, no-go approach with different evaluators. And if it is a go, you'll be allowed to submit at the next stage, the full application. If it's a no-go, you'll have one more chance to convince them. Once you go to the full application, you have 12 months to submit at one of the deadlines, currently June or October of this year. And this will be a longer application, probably closer to 20 pages, updated pitch deck, and so on. Here again, this will be judged by a panel of experts, which will give a go or no-go. If it's a go, you will be invited to interview. If it's a no-go, you'll have one more chance to convince the evaluators at the full application stage. Once you're in interview, the company is facing a panel of 6 jury members, which are selected typically in your community, investor community, business angels, incubators, deep tech investors, VCs, and so on. And those people will make the final recommendation of go or no go. And here there can be multiple outcomes. It can be a go, which means investment is okay. It can be a no-go, you have to go back to the full application stage, or it can be a no-go, but they want to see you again directly at the interview. So that's the current process. Now, what's important is that if you fail twice at a given stage, you are then put in a cooling off period for at least 12 months. The reason for this is because in the previous framework, they were allowing an unlimited number of resubmission, which created a snowball effect where there were more and more and more applications being in the pool. And of course, the success fees were dropping accordingly. So now they're trying to reduce the oversubscription with this mechanism, which we think is a very good way of tackling the problem. Once the company has been approved, the two process, grant and equity, will start in parallel. So the grant will take typically 3 to 4 months to be signed, and then you'll receive the pre-financing, 55%, as I indicated. The equity will start in parallel, but will take more time, 6 to 12 months on average. Currently, we're seeing delays, so a bit more, but that's because they have a backlog and it's the first time they implement. I think they will come back to their 6 to 12 months target this year. So the novelties on this program compared to what we've seen before is that the application is now split in two, and the short application is of course much faster to put together in theory. I say in theory because many companies think, okay, now before I had to write 30 pages, now I have to write 5, so I can do it over the weekend. That's a really bad idea. In fact, I would argue that making it a shorter application makes it even more difficult. And you probably are aware of that because sometimes you've seen a 100-page business plan that were probably created in 1 or 2 weeks, when in fact the crisp 10-page business plan that you have seen, which were the best ones, took months to polish. And that's exactly the same thing here. And I think Winston Churchill said it very well when he was discussing about the time required. So if you want me to speak for 2 minutes, it will take me 3 weeks. If you want me to speak for an hour, I'm ready now. It's really the reality of also grant preparation. It's a very short grant application. It's very, very time consuming to distill the essence of the project into something in 5 pages that can convince the evaluators. It's much easier to just throw everything at them and have a 100-page application. We also have the additional complexity here of building a video pitch, which is not a standard exercise for a grant application. There are multiple approaches to this. Of course, you can have a founder interview, you can have a product video, you can have a mix of both. I think we have to be careful about this because I don't think the Commission wants to create a world where the best company will be the ones, or the selected companies will be the one that invest a lot of money on an expensive video. I don't think that is the goal. So I think the point here is to build a very strong, impactful video, which really is an interview of the founders. I mentioned the strategic challenges. So in parallel to the open call, where any company can apply, there are also specific challenges that you can apply for. And for 2021, the Commission has put the priorities on digital and health. And you can see here a couple of the topics that they want to cover. And digital, for example, includes things like HPC, quantum, cybersecurity, AI, blockchain. Health is including also AI-driven tools for diagnostics, cell and gene therapies, e-health solution, etc. Green Deal is about renewable energy, both production and storage, in particular green hydrogen. Renovation, there's a green wave, green renovation wave that is ongoing now for both the residential and commercial buildings. Low carbon industries, how to reduce the carbon footprint of the energy intensive industries, and specifically storage systems, in particular for stationary and for transport. So these are the topics that they'd like to see many applications about, and they have set up a specific pot of money for this, which is almost as big as the open call. This does not necessarily mean that if you see your company or your companies in a portfolio with the right keyword, they should be applying. And I'll give you an example of blockchain or fintech in general. Unfortunately, there's been very few blockchain/fintech company funded under the previous program. And I think that will continue to be the case. And I think the reason behind that is because if you use blockchain for fintech, the societal challenge is really not clear. Unless you can demonstrate something amazing like maybe targeting on the unbanked people, giving access to credit to low-income people, or using blockchain for other purposes, like, for example, for the energy market and etc. But I think the fact that there's blockchain here doesn't mean that your typical blockchain/fintech company will easily be funded. That's quite the opposite. So here, I think we have to rely on our experience here, because we've tried many different approaches, and there are specific keywords in that list that do not work very well, that they have lower chances of funding. It could be a structural issue because they are the wrong type of evaluators in the pool, or it could be simply that these are not identified as high enough on the agenda in terms of societal challenges. This is the main issue with the accelerator, the success rates. And you may have heard about this. And of course, companies who have applied, spent lots of resources and money, might be telling you and other company of the portfolio, don't apply, it's just a mess, you will never get funded. That's not really true. If you do things right, of course, the success rates have been dropping. I mean, from 4% in October to 2019, down to less than 1% in October 2020. But I think the oversubscription has been mostly fueled by resubmission, so we should see that stopping. In fact, the Commission is forecasting a average success rate of about 2.5% in 2021, so better than what it was at the end of last year.